Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into a couple of completely contrasting styles, namely because I didn't have any additional beers that paired well with them, either a single brewer review or a beer of equal style. But nonetheless, I think I'm in for a real treat, and this will just be another perfect example of just how varied and different the world of craft beer is. There are so many hundreds of styles, sub-styles. There's a little something for everybody out there. I'm fortunate that I like the vast majority, but maybe we're going to cover some styles today that some of you have never heard of, never thought about, never tried. So I'll do my best to explain to you exactly what they're about in case you think they sound like something you might want to try. That's exactly what the craft beer world is about, and I'm a massive fan, as you obviously know. So today, we're going to be starting on the darker end of the spectrum. This is Listerman Brewing Company's Chickow. This is a double brown ale style that is very underrepresented in my opinion. This one clocks in at 10% ABV. It's been brewed with hazelnut. Listerman Brewing Company is based in Cincinnati, Ohio. Moving on to beer number two. One of the absolute masters in the game right now. This is Anchorage Brewing Company. This is called the Tide and its Takers. It is a Belgian-style triple brewed with Brettanomyces, so it's going to be a sour. It's been aged in French oak Chardonnay barrels, and this one clocks in at 9% ABV. So we're going only one ABV apart. One is a dark, big version of a standard style with an additive. The other is an American interpretation of a Belgian style that's been barrel aged, and again with an additive that's really that Britanomyces yeast, so it's going to sour up a Belgian style triple. Frankly, both of these sound great, distinctly different, completely opposite ends of the beer spectrum, but I am really looking forward to jumping into both of these. So we're going to do exactly that. We're going to get started with the Listerman Brewing Company's Chickow. This is the double brown ale brewed with hazelnut that clocks in at 10% ABV. Okay, so jumping into the first beer of today's contrasting craft beer style review, we are jumping straight in to Listerman Brewing Company's Chickow. This is a double brown ale brewed with hazelnut, clocks in at 10% ABV, and Listerman Brewing Company is based in Cincinnati, Ohio. So first things first, starting with the label art, really not that much super exciting to talk about. It's a nice looking, clean design label, dark purple, got kind of gold lettering, and you know, that's about all there is to talk about there. But nonetheless, we're going to get this cracked. As we do so, and before we get into this, we are going to talk about brown ales. Brown ales are one of my favorite styles. It was one of the early styles I jumped into when I first really got into craft beer. And you can find them, yes, but it's not that popular a style, it seems, at least in America. They're hard to find. There's not a ton of them. You're lucky if you find one on draft somewhere. And frankly, it's one that I really love. It's almost like a lighter version of a stout or a porter with added different flavor profiles and complexities. A lot of them tend to be nutty, and that harkens back to kind of a sub-style, a nut brown ale. And frankly, I think this hazelnut is going to pair well in this beer style. Never had a brown ale anywhere near 10% ABV. They called this a double brown ale. They easily could have called it an imperial brown ale. Nonetheless, I think I'm going to be in for a treat. So, let's hold this up. Visually, that is a classic brown ale. It is not pitch black. It is very dark brown, and no hint of haze at all. That's very typical for the style. It's normally very clear, just dark, amber, deep dark brown. Looks lovely. Formed a pretty good head here. I'm going to have a little residual pad, a little cling. That's pretty typical. Sometimes if you get them on a tap at a bar, they'll generate a little bit better head, but they do tend to be pretty effervescent beer styles, not dissimilar to porters, so you're not going to normally have thick pads of foam. But nonetheless, looks the part. Let's give it a sniff. Okay. So as with most brown ales, the aroma is not particularly pronounced. When I got right up over it, what did I get first and foremost? Well, as you might expect, I got hazelnut. Really comes through in the aroma here, albeit you've got to really breathe in deeply to get it. It's hazelnut and then that naturally roasted, slightly nutty smelling malt backbone. And that's different than the hazelnut. That's not why I'm saying nutty. Brown ales do often have this slight nutty aroma to them due to the malts that are used in their production. Nonetheless, this one looks great. It smells great. Let's jump right in and see what this hazelnut double brown ale is about. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, man. Oh, that is intensely flavorful. Oh, that is so good. Okay. Wow. I'll just throw it out on the table. I've had many brown ales in my life. I've been fortunate to say that because, like I said, it's not the easiest style to come by. It's easier than a barley wine, but it's not as popular. There's not as many out there in the marketplace, which I think is a shame because it's a really underappreciated, in my opinion, and underrepresented style. And it's got a lot that could bring a lot of people to the table here. I am easily going to say, unquestionably, on first sip, that is hands down the best brown ale I have ever had. Ever. And that includes additional different nut brown ales and some brewed with nuts. And sure, maybe this one has a little bit of an advantage that it's a bigger beer, higher ABV, more ingredients in there to bring out this depth of flavor. But I can't even begin to describe you just how intense the flavor is on this beer. It is mind-bogglingly intense. So first thing is I was swishing on the palate immediately. You don't even have to remotely swallow this beer. That hazelnut presence is front and center. Absolutely front and center, and it is intense. As soon as you swallow, the intensity on the hazelnut really is just compounded. I mean, it's at least 2, 3, 4-fold the intensity. Immediately behind that, you get that undercurrent, that rich layer of that roastiness. There's some slight caramelly notes and that natural nuttiness. And again, I'm talking about a nuttiness that comes from the malts. I'm not talking about the hazelnuts. They're separate and they're distinctly different, and you can pick them out. This brown ale in particular, I've had a few that do this and a few other beers that do this. It's got an interesting kind of almost buttered popcorn finish to the end of it. And the hazelnut's really binding to that, as well as the underlying roastiness. And it just adds this extra kind of surprise layer in there. And it is just positively delicious. I can't overemphasize just how great this beer tastes. So I'm going to jump back in for body and mouthfeel. I'm going to think a bit more on the flavor development, see how it intensifies, and we'll talk about the finish. This one has a medium heavy body. Brown ales do not typically have a particularly heavy body, but this is 10%. Kind of expected it. Mouthfeel is a good bit more resistant than your average brown ale, but again, this one's 10%. One thing that I can tell you about this one that you do not normally see is when you agitate around the palate, normally you can feel the mouthfeel, you can feel the resistance and basically the weight. On this one, it gets ridiculously creamy, bordering on silky. It doesn't really thicken, it just gets super fine, super creamy, bordering on silky. Very nice mouthfeel. In terms of the intensifying of the flavors, you bet, it's absolutely there. And on second sip, I'm getting some additional subtleties I didn't get on first. And this is all coming out of the malt bill and really how it's interacting with that hazelnut. There are these underlying, almost subtle notes of fresh cherries that are kind of mixing in with this nuttiness, this butteriness, that distinct hazelnut flavor, and that kind of buttered popcorn on the end, and they're all just kind of blending. All of these different profiles are coming through and they have their own voice in this beer, and they're all delicious. And let me tell you, they absolutely work very well together. This is not your average brown ale. This is definitely something special. I am a big fan. In terms of the length of the finish, this one is also quite a bit longer than your average brown ale, and it's really coming down to the intensity of flavor. It's a 10%, it's a bigger beer, it's got a big bold nut that also hazelnut, genius choice for a brown ale. It really pairs well in most beers. Hazelnut and chestnut, those are two of my favorite. I always grab them when I find them. It was actually the reason I got this. It was a double win. Brown ale, imperial, really triple win. Double ale, double brown ale, and hazelnut. So I got three things that I really am a fan of all in the same beer. And this one, I got to tell you, it's absolutely tremendous. I'm going to take my time, sip on this, come up with my scores. When we come back, we will get to the second beer of today's review. That is Anchorage Brewing Company's The Tides and Its Takers, which is a French oak Chardonnay barrel-aged Belgian-style triple brewed with Britanomyces that clocks in at 9% ABV. Okay, so now jumping into the second beer of today's highly contrasting style review, which in other words, you could just say I had some tasty sounding beers I wanted to enjoy, but had nothing really of the same to pair them together. So nonetheless, we're jumping into it. This is Anchorage Brewing Company's The Tide and Its Takers. This is a Belgian-style triple that's been aged in French oak Chardonnay barrels. 9% ABV on this one. Anchorage Brewing Company is based in Alaska. So, Belgian-style triple that's been aged, not really particularly all that interesting, but they did brew this with Britanomyces. That is the yeast strain that is responsible, the microorganism that works all the magic in all of your favorite sour beers. So, we've got this nice little cork cage on here. Let's get that out of the way first. And before I crack that, we're going to check out this bottle art, which is really, really quite lovely. It's got this huge kind of crashing wave motif on there. I really like it. It looks quite nice. So let's just see if we can get a good grip on this cork. Okay, so thanks to video editing magic, we've now got the cork out of there. This one was really, really tight. Really did not want to come out. That took quite a bit of work, and no sense in you watching me struggle with the cork for a minute. Nonetheless, we got it pulled. I haven't sniffed it yet. Let's do so. Oh, wow. Yeah. There was all sorts of funk and tart and just sour, and almost smells like bananas and ripe mangoes and bubble gum, like juicy fruit. It's got a really interesting aroma. Smells really quite nice. So, Belgian-style triple. Let's see how dark this one is when we get it in the glass. Absolutely lovely beer. Yeah, that's really, really nice looking. I think I could probably, yeah, I should be able to get this whole thing in this glass. Little sediment at the end, that is fine. We'll get that in there. So, very, very pronounced aroma. Very, very pronounced. You can smell that sour, that Britanomyces right away. I mean, as soon as you get anywhere kind of near it after it's been cracked, and it's, you know, exactly what I picked up on the end of the cork, but far more pungent in the glass. So, visually, quite a light beer. It is quite a light beer. Looks quite nice though. Did get a little bit of a head. Pretty fine. It's going to hold there. Quite effervescent. Higher ABV beer, 9% ABV. I kind of expected that. So right up for a proper sniff. Oh yeah. Everything in that is amplified. And it absolutely, same thing I picked up on the cork. Immediately away. You know it's Britanomyces. You get that intense sour. You get that intense tartness. But there's a ton of fruit and interesting aromas happening here. As I said, there is banana, there's kind of bubblegum, there's mango, there's peaches in there. It smells kind of like tutti frutti. It smells really, really good, guys. I can't wait. We're going to jump in and just see what this is about. Oh. That's a big beer. That's a complex beer. Wow, there's a lot of flavors happening there. It's kind of interesting how it hits. So, immediately, the first thing you get as you swish around the palate, you start to detect that distinct Britanomyces, slight sourness, slight tanginess, slight tartness, slight funkiness. Immediately upon assuming it's just an explosion, just this massive intensification of the same thing you got when you're swishing around the palate. And it comes in really big, interesting layers. So the first thing is indeed the Britanomyces. It's got a lot of funk on this one. It's got some nice bitter to the back, so I don't know what hops they used in here, but they weren't shy with them. It's got this nice bittering. You also really detect that barrel quite strongly. And there is indeed, Chardonnay barrels, there is an element of vinous quality that's in here, but it's not super, super present. Frankly, the Brettanomyces is such a big ingredient in any beer that I'm really getting more of kind of the woody elements, the woody notes from the French oak, from the barrel aging, much more so than really any flavor. There's some aromas and there are some flavors, but by and large, what I'm getting is dominant coming out of this from the Britanomyces mixed with their malts and the beer style. Really, really nice, very complex. So I'm going to jump back in for body and mouthfeel, think on the flavor development a bit more in the finish, but big beer, delicious beer. The body's got a good bit of breadth to it. 9% on a Belgian Triple, you would kind of expect it to have some breadth. It feels a little heavier than your average Belgian Triple. In terms of mouthfeel, it's also a little bit more resistant, but because of that Britanomyces, it's got this, even though it's got quite a long finish, these flavors are intense, it does have that classic kind of drying sensation that you get in the vast majority of sour beers. It has this nice crispness to it on the end. Kind of dries the palate out a little bit. But I'm still getting just tons and tons of sour. I'm getting tons of tart. I'm getting a really nice punch of bitters I did not expect. Whatever hops they put in there, they're doing their job. Nice bittering. And that woodiness really comes through even more prevalently on second sip. That's kind of binding more with the hops than anything to me, and it really binds well. The hops I'm getting here are quite intense and they're quite earthy. That's the dominant flavor profile I'm getting out of this. In terms of the fruity accents, most of that's happening in the aroma, not so much in the flavor here, but the underlying flavor, these kind of fruit profiles that are popping out, it's definitely kind of a peach-like quality, kind of a stone fruit, ripe stone fruit, but just with a ton of bittering on the back and this woodiness and that kind of sharpness from the sour and the tart that the Britanomyces brings to the table. Honestly, there's a lot happening in this beer. I'm sure as this warms up beyond British cellar temperature, it's going to get even more complex. I do find that to be the case. I've had quite a few of Anchorage's sours they've done like this, and they all just keep getting better and better as they get progressively warmer, but I'm a big fan. I'm going to take my time sip on this, come up my scores. When we come back, we will get both beers ranked from top to bottom. Okay, now that we've gotten to enjoy both beers, we're going to get them ranked. Starting with the Listerman Brewing Company's Chickow, this was a double brown ale. They could call it imperial, they called it double. 10% ABV on this one, it was brewed with hazelnut. Listerman Brewing Company is based in Cincinnati, Ohio. Starting with the aroma. The aroma on this one was very nice, certainly more pungent than average. What I got was classic brown ale, kind of malt aroma with this very present hazelnut that just floated right on top. It smelled very, very good. Overall, aroma gets a 7 out of 10. Moving on to the taste. The taste on this was absolutely fantastic. I am a massive fan of brown ales. I don't think there's enough love given to the style. And then you couple a brown ale with a hazelnut, that is a really good match. And this is the biggest brown ale I've ever had. Easily the best one I've ever had. Taste was amazing. It does get a 10 out of 10. For the body, this was a tricky category, but given that it's roughly double the average ABV of a standard brown ale, I went with my gut. You know, it's a big beer and it presented with a larger body. Body, I gave a 10 out of 10. Mouthfeel, same thing here. It had far more resistance than your average brown ale. They typically don't feel that resistant. This one did, but again, double the ABV of the norm. Again, I just went with what was presented with me and it felt right for the ABV range. Mouthfeel gave a 10 out of 10. Finish on this. This was so much longer than a standard brown ale. It's really kind of crazy to think about. And it really all came down to the intensity of that hazelnut. Yes, the malt bill was there. It was a solid, classic brown ale malt bill, just amped up because it doubled the standard malts more or less. But that hazelnut was so present. It paired with that malt bill and just kind of binded to it and really, really extended the length of the finish on this one. Just hazelnut haunting the back of the palate long after each sip. Finish gets a 10 out of 10. Head and retention, This one did a great job. Brown ales tend to be very effervescent. They normally form a little bit of a head, back off almost like a Belgian quad, kind of in that territory range. This one did a good job. Overall, exactly kind of what I anticipated for a beer of this style in this ABV range, which, you know, first crack at it, I was impressed. Head and retention, I gave a 10. For the appearance, there was really no discernible difference here. Maybe it was slightly darker than your average brown ale, but double the malts, it's going to add intensity of color. Appearance, I gave a 10 out of 10. Balance, I really enjoyed the balance on this beer. As much as I am a fan of hazelnut and beer, and as good as I thought the overall package was, I would have liked maybe just a little bit more of that malt character to come through. That hazelnut was so powerful, and don't get me wrong, it's absolutely delicious, but that was really the only minor tweak I would make. Just maybe dial the hazelnut back just a tick to let the malt bill come through a little more clearly. Balance, dock 1 point here, 9 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible, subjectively, I absolutely loved it. This was absolutely top tier. First Imperial with hazelnut added at that, and they nailed it. 10 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, well, as a brown ale, it was very unique. As an Imperial, it's the first one I've ever reviewed. And if this is kind of the vibe on an Imperial brown ale, I hope more brewers kind of take this torch and run with it. Give it 10 out of 10, which brings the total score on Listerman Brewing Company's Chickow to a 96 out of 100. Just absolutely top tier. If you're a fan of the style or beers with hazelnut in them, this is one to seek. Moving on to beer number 2. This is Anchorage Brewing Company's The Tide and its Takers, a Belgian-style triple that's been aged in French oak Chardonnay barrels. 9% ABV on this one. Of course, they're based in Anchorage, Alaska. So this was another tricky beer. Contrasting beer styles, but both a bit tricky. This one even more so than the last. Because a Belgian Triple does not typically have Brettanomyces yeast in it, and that threw the entire profile of the beer kind of out the window. So my ranking on this was quite a bit of a challenge, but I did the best I could. In terms of aroma, massively pungent. There were elements of it that smelled like a typical Belgian Triple, but that Britanomyces really was so pungent, so bold, added all those additional elements to the table, and certainly intensity as well. Aroma, I did give a 10 out of 10. For the taste, this was one of the categories I was torn on, because really the taste was nothing like a standard Belgian Triple. They're not brewed with wild Britanomyces yeast in it. This added a completely different flavor element to the palate. Really hard to judge, so I kind of had to just say, okay, this is a twist on a Belgian Triple, but what did I get? I didn't want to be too harsh and judge strictly by the style criterion. Taste, I said it was well above average. I gave it an 8 out of 10. For the body on this one was exactly what I expect for a Belgian Triple. It does get the 10 out of 10. Mouthfeel was the same thing here, with the exception that it was a lot drier, a lot crisper. Britanomyces, it's hard to say what it would have been without that, but that is a character trait. So I just kind of ranked it on its own here, 10 out of 10 for the mouthfeel. For the finish was very pungent, very long. I think if the Britanomyces had not been in there, the base beer style probably would have pushed out a very long distance because the flavors were bold, they were pungent. But Britanomyces sour beers in general, if you've had a fair bit of them, you know they do tend to dry the palate out. So they end a bit crisper and the finish is maybe not as long as another similar type beer style. So this did kind of throw a monkey wrench in the mix of things, but overall the flavors were so pungent anyway, the finish did still extend a very long time. I give it a 9 out of 10. Head and retention, exactly as expected for a Belgian style triple, 10 out of 10. Appearance wise, that classic light golden yellow color. They kind of run into the different gamuts here. Some can have a little more orangey hue, some a little darker, some a little lighter. This was maybe a little bit on the lighter end, but still in the spectrum. Appearance, 10 out of 10. Balance. This was another category that was challenging for me because I didn't really, there's nothing to which to compare it. It's kind of its own entity. Belgian style triple, but with Britanomyces added, throws the entire balance of the beer off. I just went with what I experienced. I thought the balance was well above average. If anything, maybe go a little higher ABV, but not getting into quad territory. Keep it that classic Belgian triple golden color, and just increase the volume of malts. Maybe a little bit less Britanomyces, I don't know, but I still enjoyed what I got. I gave the balance an 8 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible, subjectively, absolutely loved it. It gets a 10 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style, this was the last very challenging category, if not the most challenging to score. As a Belgian triple, this was so far out of the norm that it's almost impossible to rank. Taking that this might almost have to be its own unique sub-style, I took that into account, and having nothing by which to judge prior, I went with above average. I tried to be as fair as I could. I gave it an 8 out of 10, which does bring the total score on Anchorage Brewing Company's The Tied In as takers to a 93 out of 100. So both distinctly contrasting, completely different beer drinking experiences, and both kind of challenging to rank in their own right because they're so different than the stylistic norms. And that's one thing about the craft movement. Brewers are getting inventive, they're trying new things, and maybe we just are going to have a whole ton of subsets of side categories. Whether or not they get into accepted sub-styles at judging competitions on the international scale, I don't know. That's yet to be seen. But I do know I am personally a fan of the inventive nature of the brewers. I say keep trying new things, keep bringing new things to the market. Our palates are all the better for it. And at day's end, we, the beer consumers, are the winners. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live to YouTube, you just click the notification bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.